This is my research evaluation. For the start of the research and planning, I created a list of primary, secondary, and then the planning. The reason I did this was so I had a design list of the things I knew I needed to go through. So for my primary, it was the analysis of 3 gaming podcasts that I started with, and completed those analysis, which were one of them being IGN's Game Scoop podcast. The podcast was designed as a gabfest, and these podcasts were quite specific. One of them was more professional in IGN, as IGN is a professional company, while the other 2 were done by just normal people. It was one of them was a group of 2, while the other was a group of 3, and they all were specified on different things. For example, IGN was more gaming news as a whole, while one was talking about retro games, but not from recent times, like a lot, like the 80s and 90s was their forte usually. They had some special ones where I think they did special one-offs at the end of the year, where they would make one closer to the times now. And the other one would just talk about any gaming topic they wanted to, and just talk for the next hour and a half. From that, I was able to, of course, establish a codes and conventions, and then after that, I was able to also analyse podcast websites and get those codes and conventions. The reason why I did both analysis is, of course, for the podcast, I was able to learn how the people made these podcasts, what things they specifically did only in gaming podcasts, how long they usually were, and then, of course, with the websites, it was specific to gaming websites and what they made, as, of course, gaming websites and other websites for podcasts would be completely different in style, and because of that, you find different information. The only reason the podcasts are different to the websites is a lot of these podcasts don't have websites accompanying them, which is quite interesting. IGN's got a much larger website to the point where it's in there, but it's not on itself. It's not by its lonesome, unlike the other 2, which mysteriously didn't have one. So I went and found other ones. From those, the colour style was usually black, white with some light blue tones. I might use light blue, but I might also not with my own. After I'd done the analysis, I then conducted a questionnaire. The questionnaire was specific for what an audience would find appealing about a gaming podcast. This was from its length to what games we'd talk about, but also finding a bit more out about the audience, about what their first console was, what their first game was. And then I also have a focus group which is more specific. The plan at first was to have 2 males and a female. However, after trying to find people, it was more difficult, as we looked and there was no female, so instead we swapped it for another male. However, this male had played the game a lot more than the other 2. These 2 had played it, finished the game, done a lot of the content, but this person had 100%ed the game on actually more than one occasion, so I was able to get loads of information from them. The focus group went on a lot longer than was expected from the amount of questions, and from that I was able to gain a lot of knowledge about what they wanted from this podcast, what things they would want from further down the line, how they would like to see the podcast be recorded, its length. I was able to get in loads of information there. At the same time, I was conducting secondary research about making a gaming podcast. This was through anything from the history of audio broadcasting from the unit before, taking things from that, or also popularity of podcasts, how big they've become now. And overall, the main thing for me was what makes a good podcast and what should be included in my podcast website. When it came to planning, this was the largest part because at first, I start with a proposal. Of course, this proposal was to outline how the podcast will be made, the name of the podcast, who its audience is, what this podcast could become later down the line. But through all that, I'm able to gain more information myself about what I want to create. Of course, after this, the next part was creating a running order for the podcast itself. And this running order was 30 minutes long and had three areas of questions, which one would be from game design and two would be from a fan of the game. The fan of the game would talk about the game itself in the first 30 minutes, while the game designer would talk more specifically about the aesthetics of the game. After I'd set up this planning, I then started the scripting for my questions for these people, and also the scripting of the introduction to the podcast, the game, the people, and then the outro at the end, and also what music I would want to use within this podcast, as I wanted it, of course, to be gaming music. First, the introduction, which would be its own specific thing by itself, and then the music afterwards, the music bed, which would be there to but yeah, with that music bed, I want that to be more specific to the game itself. Because this is Batman Arkham Asylum, so I'll be using music from that game. It'll of course be underneath all the interviews and all the talking. It'll be much lower, but it'll also be able to be heard throughout. Then, of course, I'll be recording in the radio room for my interviews and my other scripted elements, I have created a location recce and also a risk assessment for these two, for the aspects of this room. The risk assessment has any potential dangers and how I'll be able to overcome. There's nothing too dangerous in there. At most, there'd be bruising, but the chance of that is extremely low, and there's a higher possibility when out of the room. Location recce is the places to go eat, is the place to go drink, is the place to go to the toilet. The answer to all these is yes. Is there certain ways to get there through bus? Yes. Then for the website itself, I've created a set of planning notes which now have the exact colours I want for the website. I don't think I'm going to use light blue, like said in the planning notes, as I think the black and white will look cleaner. Maybe with a touch of gold. It's gold and black can work, and that can be used for the search bar. Of course, I also need to see the layout myself, so I've created a sketch of the website so I can see the exact layout. The layout is very similar to the websites I have analysed. So the search bar for me is on the right with the logo on the left, and then everything coming down the middle. However, my podcast episode will not be at the bottom, as it's only the first episode, so we'll leave that bare, and that'll also only be in the episode section. Maybe if there was more, then I could promote those older episodes there. And for the logo design, the logo is going to be very simple. All I want is a controller with the name. I don't want anything over the top. It'll probably just be basic black and white,